Revelation 13:11, and I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth, a beast representing a nation, coming out of the earth, an area of relative obscurity, apart from the old world with its teeming masses of people. And he had, in fact, 90% of the Indian population, it's estimated, died in the few years preceding the arrival of the Pilgrims at Plymouth Rock in 1620. From disease, 90%. A vacuum was existing, a place for the persecuted of Europe to come. He had two horns. Horns represent power, like a lamb. And the two lamb-like horns of America are civil and religious liberty, civil and religious freedom. And he spake as a dragon. And a dragon represents Satan. Revelation chapter 12, verse 9. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So, America starts out Christ-like principles, civil and religious liberty. And I'd like to portray, as much as I can tonight in the time that we have, the struggle that took place. What we are doing here this weekend, preaching, was banned in England before the Pilgrims came over here. In fact, what we do when we have a Bible study or Sabbath school lessons, where we look at the Word of God and people comment on it, was banned by Queen Elizabeth in 1567, if my memory serves me correctly. Now, that was just a few years before the Spanish Armada sailed to try to bring England under the control of Roman Catholicism. It was a long struggle. Henry VIII had declared his freedom from the Pope over an issue involving his marriages, many wives, as you know, and he declared himself the head of the church in England. And so the Anglican Church was formed, but it retained many of the old Romish symbols and institutions, among which was wearing the surplice, making the sign of the cross, and wearing the wedding ring. When Queen Elizabeth died, they only mourned her for 4 days, and then King James took the throne, who was in many ways a wicked man. But he did one good thing in that he ordered the translation of the King James Version. But his reason for doing that was to get rid of the Geneva Bible. I have here the Geneva Bible. This was the Bible that was loved by the Pilgrims and the Puritans, translated in Geneva, Switzerland, by the English expatriate community in Calvinist Geneva. John Knox taught his followers in Scotland to hate all tyranny in the church and in the state. And the Presbyterian Church took control there. They hated hierarchy. In fact, there is a very, very interesting fact that has escaped many, many people in our modern world today, and that is that when Tyndale translated the Bible, and I have here Tyndale's New Testament, when he came to the Greek word ecclesia, which your King James Bible translates church, he translated it congregation. What it strictly means, if you give a literal meaning from the Greek, ecclesia. When Jesus said, "Behold, thou art Petros, a rolling stone, and upon this, the Petra." Petra is feminine, Petros is masculine. He was talking about something completely different. On this, himself, the rock of ages, on this, the Petra, I will build my congregation, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. Oh, did the Puritans love that term congregation, because it meant And they often turn to this verse in Matthew chapter 18. Let's turn there. Matthew chapter 18 and verse 20. This is a favorite verse of the separatists, the pilgrims that came over here. There is a new book that's come out in recent years, actually came out in 2010, Making Haste from Babylon. Believe it or not, the pilgrims believed that they were fleeing Babylon when they came over here to America. America was founded on the roots of fleeing Babylon. Have you ever heard about "Come out of her, my people"? Revelation 18. They believed they were fleeing Babylon and that the old country was Babylon. King James hated the Puritans so much, he said, "I want to harry them out of the country." Ellen White stops at that point in her quoting of the statement, but we know from historians that he went on and he had another thing that he said, "Only hang them, that's all." He wanted to hang every Puritan he could find. And yet, the Puritans presented him with the millenary petition, which represented the signatures of about 1,000 Puritan leaders and preachers, for him to sign when he came riding down from Scotland into England to take the English throne. Matthew 18, verse 20, "For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, there am I in the midst of them." And you know what Ellen White said about that, don't you? In Upward Look. Church is not the great cathedral, it's not the various denominations, it's the people who love God and keep His commandments. Now, here is where things get interesting. Tyndale, whenever he came to ecclesia, which means the called out ones, the congregation, you see, is made up of the called out ones, the ones that are called out of Babylon, the ones that are called out of the world. Ek kaleo. Kaleo is to call in Greek. Ek means out of, to call out. The congregation is the called out ones, the ones that have come out, the very thing message that we're to give about the fall of Babylon. Come out of her, my people. Before Babylon collapses, God calls His people out. It's just like an ancient king giving the final ultimatum to a city that he's about to destroy and inviting the people to escape for their lives. Making haste from Babylon. So, when the Geneva Bible came out, it carried on that tradition of translating ecclesia as congregation. But at the time of 1611, when the King James Version was translated, and mind you, I believe the King James is the very finest translation that we have into English of the Bible. But I'll tell you, there's something even better, and that's if you read Hebrew and Greek and Aramaic. And then you really get to the bottom of things. And that's what all of the reformers said. They had, when they had their debates in the 16th century Reformation, they always put out the Hebrew and Aramaic Old Testament and the Greek New Testament on the table, and they examined what the original languages said. At the time when the 1611 translation came out, translated by 54 of the finest minds in England in linguistics who knew Hebrew, Greek, and Aramaic, and they counter-checked each other 4 times with the various committees before anything was passed to go into the King James Version. But they had rules that were laid down by the king. And one of the rules was that they were to follow as much as possible the ecclesiastical usages of words. And they were to also follow the bishop's Bible, which was the big Bible that was then in use by the Anglican Church that was chained to the pulpits and the desks in their churches. And a big issue, of course, in England was that the Reformation produced a very individualistic religion in England compared to Germany and the continent of Europe. People loved to read the Bible for themselves. And what they would do is when the preacher was up preaching or the priest was up, because it was the Anglican Church, with many of the Romish customs, when he was up giving his sermon, there would be a man back in the back who would be reading the Bible in English and disrupting the service so much that they banned that practice, and the people all would want to go back and hear what the Bible actually said for itself. But the bishop's Bible translated it church, not congregation, and so the King James translators were obligated under the rules of translation that they were given by the king to translate ecclesia as church rather than congregation. Now, the Puritans didn't accept, they loved the Geneva Bible. They didn't accept the King James for decades. Finally, they did. But one thing that the king hated about the Geneva Bible was its marginal notes. And if you look in a Geneva Bible, you see all these notes about the papacy, warning about the Pope, warning about the Antichrist, all these things that were so dear to the Puritan heart. And by the way, Puritan was a pejorative term that was applied to these people because they wanted to purify the Church of England from Romish practices. And when the king had a session where he brought in the Puritans to present their case, and he had the bishops to present their case. And one of the leading Puritans spoke about the wedding ring. Do you know the wedding ring has been an issue for 400 years? Symbol of the papacy and its control over marriage. And he reproved the king for wearing a wedding ring. King wore a wedding ring, King James. As I said, he was a wicked man in many ways. Not just that he hated Puritans, but in his immoral life. And the king was greatly offended by this and launched a vicious attack and rebuttal in defense of the wedding ring. But what do we see happening now in many structure weddings? From what I hear, it's almost all the time now. Wedding ring. People don't know their history. They don't know what went on or what the battles were and what they have been for 400 years. So the Puritan movement split over the issue of should we stay in the church structure of the Anglican Church and try to purify it. Or there was another group that said, it'll never happen. We won't be able to do it. The forces against us are too great. You've got the king, you've got the bishops, you've got the whole hierarchy. And besides, the Presbyterians hated hierarchy. They saw it as a form of tyranny and church control. Now what do we have going on in America? We have the formation of the image of the beast taking place before your very astonished eyes. What was the beast like in the time of the Inquisition? Anybody here read Fox's Book of Martyrs? Some? Fox's Acts and Monuments? Anyone? Well, I don't really blame you because there's about 8 volumes that are about 1,000 pages of fine print, about that thick, each one. I have it, but it's fascinating reading. But what did they try to find out? They would arrest someone who was guilty of heresy. It was the structural hierarchy that was doing it. They would bring them into the inquisitional dungeons and torture them to try to find out who were their connections, who else believed like they did, who were their friends that they could haul off and bring into the dungeons too for the Inquisition. Do you know how they do it now? The Internet, Facebook, Twitter, all of this social media. They know everything virtually about you. If you write emails, they record, catalog, all of that. Tom Ridge never sends an email. He said, I never send an email. He said, if the American people knew. Michael Chertoff also. Both these men said if the American people knew what is being done with their emails, they would never send a single email. But the American people have forgotten the struggles of the past and the blood that was shed. people died on the rack rather than betray their friends. Now they betray them without even thinking about it. They don't even realize it's betrayal, nor do they realize what is going on. Let me show you a bit of what is going on. There's a young man now living in Russia, afraid to come back to America because he knows what will happen to him if he does. And you know his name, Ed Snowden. Glenn Greenwald, the man who's broken most of the information about Snowden, wrote a book, No Place to Hide. Edward Snowden, the NSA, and the U.S. surveillance state, National Security Agency, according to Tex Mars, has as its symbol the crossed keys of St. Peter, showing authority over church and state. Now, you can go onto a website, glenngreenwald.net, and you can find the documents from the No Place to Hide. Here they are. Virtually every page is a whole raft of new different programs that the NSA uses to track you and everything that you do and say. And it's been said that they can even tell what you're thinking from looking at the metadata, just the contacts that you're making with your phone, the iPhones. You know, now they have GPS on them so that they can track where you are if you have your iPhone with you. Track where you are all the time. But I'll just give you a few of them here. Here's Boundless Informant. In a 1-month period, United States, 3 billion, over 3 billion records of dialed numbers. In the world, 124 billion. I'll just give you a few of them here. The new collection posture is, well, I can't even, there's Asphalt A+, there's Scale XKS, and use of MVR techniques, analysis of data at scale, Elegant Chaos. They work with the British GCHQ and share with Misawa, whatever that is. Why Tarmac? Now, he describes in his book what a lot of these, he goes into some detail. I'm just giving you an idea of the raft of programs that are just unbelievable. MHS has a growing ForeignSat mission, share division mission, SIGDEV, difficult signals collection, Asphalt, collect it all, proof of concept system. They have lied over and over again to the American people. This young man, Ed Snowden, whatever you may think about him, whatever may be said about him, he has revealed stuff that no one else in history has revealed what is going on. He saw all of this, and here's total records transferred to Marina, records in DPS-5 backlog, total DNR records received by Fascia. In Poland, 71 million records were intercepted of Americans, as I understand it, from 30 days. And here is what Guiding Light says in the British collection system. We receive upwards of 50 billion events per day. Here is from page 100 in the book. On December 21, 2012, Shell Trumpet processed its 1 trillionth metadata record. It took 5 years to get to the 1 trillion mark. Almost half of this volume was processed in this calendar year. That'd be 500 billion in 1 year. Half of that volume was from SSO's Dancing Oasis. Shell Trumpet is currently processing 2 billion call events a day. NSA strategic partnerships. Who does NSA partner with? AT&T, Quest, EDS, HP, Motorola, Cisco, Qualcomm, Oracle, IBM, Microsoft, Intel, Verizon. Do you have any phones? Verizon phones? AT&T phones? They're all sharing all their data with the NSA. Special source operations, corporate partner access. They partner with corporate entities. Storm Brew, Fairview, Blarney, Oak Star. The names just go on. I mean, I've just given you just a tiny bit of the mass. I don't want to take the rest of the time tonight to go through it, but I'm just showing you. You can go on the internet and look it up and get a grasp, get a handle on what They're watching every move you make, so they know everything about you. So how do you defeat that? Well, don't use any electronics, for one thing. Then that kind of restricts you quite a bit, doesn't it? But I tell you, if the grid goes down, you're really going to be restricted. You either be on foot or with a bicycle, and if you have a bike, then your life might be taken so someone else can ride the bike. But coming back here to the Pilgrims, Dr. Foster, I found it very interesting. He's going to be talking about David and Goliath, and he talked about typology. Did you not mention typology? This is the way the Pilgrims thought when they looked at the Bible. This is the way the New Testament writers interpreted the Old Testament. Typology. I have a whole dissertation that was done, Typology, by Richard M. Davidson at the seminary. He wrote a whole dissertation looking at about 4 or 5 examples in the New Testament and all the parameters that he could dig up on that. I believe I had to read that book for one of my classes. So, how did these people live? They lived in the world of the Word. They believed that the Word of God was more critical than anything else. They gave their lives for it. They were burned at the stake for it. They were hounded out of the country for it. It was banned to even get together and look at the Bible and see what it said and comment on it. That was called prophesying. And it was banned by Queen Elizabeth. And they had an intensified ban passed by Parliament in 1593. This is just a few years before 1611. So why do I mention about ecclesia and how you translate that? Because I say that if every time you read the Bible and you come across the word church in your King James Version, you substitute the word congregation, it changes your whole idea of what the church is, doesn't it? When I think of congregation, I think of many small congregations that I've ministered to where there's just a few families. And Jesus said, where there are 2 or 3 gathered in my name, there am I in their midst. Now, it turns out that William Brewster had some rather high connections in the government. There were sympathizers with the Puritans. Ellen White says that over a 40-year period of persecution, they got quite deeply rooted in England, and the separatists became the Pilgrims. They were the ones who said, the Anglican Church is never going to change. We're going to do something that is unheard of virtually in the history of Christianity. We are going to form our own congregation, and we are going to choose our own pastor. Well, that was earth-shaking. That was life-threatening to do that in those days. And William Brewster, who was one of the Pilgrims, he rubbed shoulders with a very important man in government whose name was Francis Walsingham, Elizabeth's spymaster, Queen Elizabeth's spymaster. This was before Queen Elizabeth died and before King James took the throne. Walsingham was the equivalent of today's MI5, MI6, and he had many methods that he used, and he was trying to root out Catholicism out of England. And the NSA even has produced a children's game based on the story of Walsingham, which is very interesting because obviously the NSA is dominated by papal entities, and Walsingham was a radical Protestant who actually was living in France at the time of the St. Bartholomew's Massacre. And I want to read you a paragraph that is very enlightening. In their home on the Quai des Bernardins in Faubourg Saint-Germain, Walsingham, his wife, and their 4-year-old daughter Frances heard the bells of the church of Saint Germain l'Auxerrois up the River Seine ring out at midnight. Do you remember how Ellen White wrote originally in The Great Controversy that there was a bell tolling at midnight that was the signal for the massacre to begin in St. Bartholomew's Day? And then there was a huge controversy in the Adventist Church over this, whether it came under attack by the liberal historians, and they said, well, there was no bell at midnight. Well, there was. Walsingham heard it. He was the top intelligence officer for Queen Elizabeth. Unknown to them and their house guest Philip Sidney, who was visiting France, it was a pious signal for bloody genocide. The homes of known Protestants in Paris had been quickly identified and their doors daubed with a white cross, indicating them as targets for the coming bloodbath. Now, I was going to show you, and I don't really have time to do it tonight, I've done it before, a portion of James Arabito's picture. Behind the Door. How many have seen it? Behind the Door. Where he interviews this man who had secret clearance, this Adventist colporteur who had secret clearance during World War II. Actually, his wife was the chief stenographer at the Pentagon. And all of the finances that were sent out to the troops in Europe passed across her desk as the chief stenographer. And she noted that all the funds went through the Vatican en route to the commanders in the field of the Allies in Europe from Washington, D.C. Anyway, he tells in there of how he was colporteuring in Chicago, and he came up to this mansion and he knocked on the door, and he knew the man inside was a Roman Catholic, so the man opened the door and he gave him his Catholic canvas, and the man invited him in. Then he closed the door behind him and he ominously locked the door. So he began feeling like he was a prisoner in this house. And the man of the house invited him to come back through some massive double doors into a huge room where there was a very large table surrounded by eminent cardinals and high prelates of the Roman Catholic Church. And so this was a novelty kind of to these men to have a captive Adventist colporteur in their midst. So they began discussing how they were planning to take over America. Said they had their armies already. Everything was in preparation. This was in the 1920s. 1920s. And so the colporteur said, well, what about the South? That's a Protestant stronghold. They said, we intend to seed the South with Roman Catholic families who will then intermarry with the Protestants and raise their children as Roman Catholics. So then they tried to get him to come over to their side. They said, come join our side because we're the winning side. There's no hope that you have of standing up against us. And he said, there's no way I'm joining your side because my horse is going through and I'm going to be enjoying heaven when you are all nonplus entities. And so one of the top cardinals stood up and he said, there's something I want you to know. Every person that is born is given a card, assigned a card by Rome. A white card initially. Then if the person shows some indication of being a potential problem, a blue card. And then when we know that that person is committed in opposition to Roman Catholicism, they get a red card, and that means we would just assume that they do not exist anymore. He said, from now on, you will have a red card. And the man goes on to tell Jim Arabito in the picture how he was followed for the rest of his life. He had been tailed and tracked and followed for the rest of his life. We are dealing with a very profound enemy. If you have ever gone up against Rome, you know what I'm talking about. But very few ever have. But when you become a target of theirs, you become aware of all the things they can begin doing to make your life come apart. You've often heard in the 1990s about the red and blue list, didn't you? They still have these lists. And now they have incredible amounts of data. Trillions upon trillions of records. And they use algorithms, and they use named word-sensitive computers, super cray computers, the best computers, biggest computers possible, to crunch the numbers and to get the data that they want out of all this mass of data. This same colporteur picked up some men hitchhiking. He was driving out of Washington, D.C. during the war to his home in Alexandria, Virginia, and he saw a couple of young men, and he sized them up, and he said, "They look like they're from Georgetown University. I'm going to pick them up." So he picked them up. They got in his car. He said, "You fellows are from Georgetown University, aren't you?" And they said, "Yes." He said, "What are you doing there?" And they said, "We are part of a project we have about 700, 800, 900 graduates a year out of Georgetown University, and we study how to infiltrate Protestant churches. Then, when we graduate, we go out and we profess conversion in those Protestant churches. We marry a girl from that church, and then we go to their seminary and remember our training the whole way through. And thus, we are infiltrating the churches." They were quite open with him about it. He tells about it on the same video, Behind the Door. I have this. We might even play some of it on Sunday when we get a little better handle on our system here. But I tell you this because I've had personal experience with these very kind of fellows. A pastor was sent to the church when we were still in the structure, when we had produced Jesuit Agenda 1, 2, 3, and 4, and military takeover of America. They were determined to shut our ministry down. They sent a pastor who had a very rough time at first with the congregation. It was the largest church in the conference, and I had been a head elder and also an elder and Sabbath school superintendent, religious liberty. In other words, I was very involved in the church. And the people weren't really buying his line at first. But then he gave them a tearjerker sermon. And he swayed about 90% of the church behind him. And he told of how he was a young man, and he was about 14, and he was disillusioned, and he began searching and seeking for the truth. And finally he found the Adventist church and joined it. So I did a little investigation, and I had a relative, a person I discovered who was a relative of his, and I asked him to inspect the background of this man. And the truth was that this man was a Roman Catholic until he was about 23 years old. Then he professed conversion to Adventism, married an Adventist girl, went to the seminary. Same deal as what this secret agent colporteur told of these Georgetown University. And the structure is full of these people. When we started up our ministry, in very short order, we had quite a list of names of people who identified pastors of this type of persuasion. There was a young man who came to our ministry in the late 90s when we were going to preparedness expos and presenting the Sabbath and our literature. And he came and spoke to the folk that were running the booth, and it was recorded. I listened to the recording. He's told them that he was a worker. He had been a worker at the computer headquarters of the Seventh-day Adventist Church at the new Sligo building. And he said that building is completely Faraday caged. It is completely sealed from all radio electronic communications coming in or going out. It's like a top secret building. And he said the computer department is vastly bigger than what is needed for a church the size of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And he told this individual from our ministry that the Central Intelligence Agency is storing massive amounts of data in that building. Now, I want you to just connect some dots here. If there is a collapse of the grid, a building that is completely Faraday caged sufficiently, what will happen with the data inside there? It will still be there. It will still be there. So the records of who the Seventh-day Adventists are will still be there, even if there's an EMP strike on the nation. And, of course, the Central Intelligence Agency has been working in harmony with the General Conference for many years, since the Vietnam War. When the Vietnam War was on, I was approached to be part of Project Whitecoat. Thousands of Adventist young men were selected at the request of Dr. Gottlieb at the CIA, who was the most diabolical man that the CIA had. And they gave him, the GC gave him thousands of young men. And they tested biological weapons, warfare weapons, on these men. And many of them have been sick ever since. Dengue fever and all kinds of Q fever and all kinds of other things. So there's been this quid pro quo. And I tell you this because I think it's important for you to know the personal dimensions of what is going on with the structure, and whether it might not be smart to read the Bible as it should be read when you come to the term ecclesia, the congregation. Because church carried the connotation of a hierarchical organization. And I often wonder if those translators had translated the word the way Tyndale did. And mind you, they took 90% of what Tyndale translated into the King James Version. And those men were too smart to follow the rules too close that the King James laid down, although they knew it could be their head. And they only followed about 8% of the bishop's Bible in the translation of the King James. But they did retain that element of translating ecclesia as church. What would have happened with the Seventh-day Adventist Church if they had had the idea of a congregation being the church instead of a hierarchical organization? You see, the followers of John Knox considered a hierarchy in the church to be the same thing as tyranny. And if you study history, you'll see that there's a continual struggle between the ancient freedoms, the ancient truths, and Satan's efforts to use hierarchical control to stamp out those truths. And I'll tell you what one of those truths is, ancient truth. The seventh-day Sabbath goes all the way back to creation. That's an ancient truth. Satan has warred against that all through the 6,000 years plus now of Earth's history, and he is now about to make a major war on it. Because every time Rome, if you study history, when Rome gets control of a nation, one of the first things she does is pass a national Sunday law. Now I come back to the story of the secret agent in that meeting with the cardinals. The cardinals told him when the South gets 50% or more of the population Roman Catholic, and when the population of America is 50% or more, then we will strike. This is exactly what happened in 1989 in Eastern Europe, where in nation after nation, when Rome saw that the Orthodox church leaders, the Eastern Orthodox church leaders, were prepared to accept the principle of papal primacy. When they reached the 50% point, they called the faithful out in the streets and toppled the governments one after another, after another, after another, every 2 weeks in 1989. And the whole face of Europe was changed. You have to understand how Rome works. The Jesuits are sappers and miners. They get in, they honeycomb things. They honeycomb the theology. They honeycomb the structure. I saw it firsthand. I saw what happened with Dr. Hazel. I knew him as a personal friend. And I've told you the story before, how the liberals came in from the GC structure and ordered him to resign or be fired within 7 days. My uncle was there, who had been division president in Africa and was now hiring and firing the 500 people at the GC headquarters. And Hazel said to him, "What should I do? If I don't resign, they'll fire me and I won't be able to get a job anywhere." So he caved in, and in the end, he was assassinated. T-bone, classic CIA T-bone crash with a truck right into the driver's side of the vehicle, and he died. And I called up the family and I said, "Do you think this was suspicious?" The man who answered the phone said, "Absolutely." And those were the beliefs of many people at Andrews for many, many years after that. I just give you a few incidents here to tell you that we have a very, very real enemy with Rome. America is going to be speaking like a dragon. It already is speaking like a dragon. But all of the machinery is now being assembled in one government federal bureaucracy after another. They have their own armies now. The DHS ordered over 2 billion rounds of ammo, distributing it to even the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration. What are they going to do with the weapons and the bullets? They are preparing for war. And the military men back from Iraq, a colonel up in a town meeting in New Hampshire said, "Can't you see it, Americans?" He said, I worked at reconstructing the Iraqi military. And he said the Department of Homeland Security would completely demolish the whole Iraqi army in 1 week with the weapons it has. Now all of these MRAP vehicles, thousands of them, are being made available to police departments across the nation. Mine-resistant vehicles that were used in Iraq and Afghanistan. Brand new, many of them, given to them. All kinds of grants. America is becoming an armed camp. And what are they going to enforce? I'll tell you what it is. It's right here in Revelation. Revelation 13, verse 15. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast. And just think, what is an image? An image is a replica. A replica of the papacy is being erected here. Even the Inquisition with the NSA, with a massive number of programs that the NSA is developing. He had power to give life unto the image of the beast, the image of the Roman hierarchy, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. That's a death decree. If you don't submit, bow down, proskuneo, bow down and kiss the big toe, so to speak, of the image of the beast. You don't surrender your life to them, to control. What did we hear in the panel? Even Obamacare is a whole system of control. And now they are flooding the borders. They're even using the children, sending untold thousands and tens of thousands of children up here. And where are they sent when they arrive? They're bused over to the Sacred Heart Church. Roman Catholicism is financing this, as are even evangelical churches, because it is the Protestants joining with the Roman Catholics that are going to do this. Why are they doing it? To change the whole demography of America, to make it more than 50% in favor of Roman Catholicism. And you know how the elections have been now the last number of times, just knife edge, this way or that way. So they're bringing in millions of Roman Catholics from inter-America. They put these children on death trains that go all the way up through Mexico. It's an agreement with Mexico. Let these people pass through. Mexico used to stop all these people at their southern border. Now they let them through on the train. They come up, they're bused, they're given tickets for buses to go all over America. People are being, last thing I just heard today, or was it yesterday? I heard yesterday that people are being offered up to $6,000 to take care of illegals. What we have is a situation where one party in this nation has become similar to the apparatus of the Nazi Party, where party loyalty is held above every other thing. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond. That's everyone, all. And it even goes through the categories, small, great, rich, poor, free, bond, to receive a mark in their right hand, showing themselves being allowed to be forced to do something, or in their foreheads, intellectual acceptance of the mark of the beast, which is a Sunday law enforced by law, Sunday worship enforced by law. and that no man might buy or sell save he that had the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. I wonder, how prepared are we for this? Country living. Ellen White said, that's why we need it. Country living. We have to be able to live apart from Babylon. We have to make haste out of Babylon like the pilgrims did. We have to be able to live independent of buying and selling. When was the last time you bought something? I did today. To be able to live without buying and selling, I tell you, you are going to be tested to the uttermost. I'm going to be tested to the uttermost. But now is the time to prepare. And Ellen White knew this under God. That's why she said, country living. Move to the mountains. Move to the forests. Get ready. And I know people here are doing that. I've talked to them just this weekend about what they're doing. Prepare, 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 said the angel. Prepare, because the coming of the Lord draweth nigh. And soon Jesus will appear in the clouds of glory. Everything will be changed. Babylon will fall like an angel taking a millstone and casting it into the sea. In 1 hour, her plagues will come. That horse is not going through, my friends, but the 3 angels' messages are going through. The 3rd angel's message is going through. Those who are followers of the Lamb will go through and be sealed. They'll see the earth wasted with famine, with heat, scorched with heat. I tell you, if someone doesn't do it before that, that scorching heat, I believe, will be sufficient to bring the grid down. Get enough solar flares, coronal mass ejections. And so we face the ultimate test of any creature that God has ever created. There will be a special category of people in heaven. Their names will be engraved in gold in heaven, of the 144,000, those who live through this time that we are facing. And believe you me, we are facing it. I live now that I understand about EMP, I live from second to second, thanking God that the grid is still working, the lights are still working, you can still hear me, and there's still a chance of us getting home from this meeting. I don't take that for granted anymore. It could all be over in a microsecond. And so, I say to you, the one relationship that is more important than any other relationship is your relationship to Jesus Christ. Is your will surrendered? Is my will surrendered completely to Him? Brought into bondage, into captivity at this point of a spear, as Paul said. Bring every thought into captivity at the point of a spear. That's real surrender. And that's what it's going to take, my friends, because he that is in you is more powerful than he that is in the world. The weakest angel in God's army is more than a match for all the armies of earth, both satanic, evil angels, and the military forces of this earth. The weakest angel, stronger than all of that. And Jesus has all power.